to the Cairo Business Mojo podcast, where we deconstruct the methods, marketing, and mindset of successful business people and chiropractors from around the world. And now your host, Dr. Richard Day.
Hello, I am Dr. Richard Day, and this is the Cairo Business Mojo podcast. Great to be with you again today. Well, it is book review time again on the podcast. Now, I did this a while back. I talked about 11 books, actually, my top 11 books that I recommend. And as soon as I put that episode out, I realized I left off a very important book. It's a big book. It was a huge book. And then I never got back to it. I never came back and touched on it again until I was talking to a recent guest who named it among his favorite books, and I thought, I have got to go back and let's do a little mini review of this book. I think it has so much information, I can't cover all of it. It's a short book, but it is packed with information. I'm going to touch on some of the most important and relevant themes, and I recommend you really read this book and check it out for yourself. And the book is called The 4-Hour Work Week. The author is Tim Ferriss, and if you haven't heard of Tim Ferriss, he is a pretty interesting guy. He has a track record of doing entrepreneurial things well, and he has become an investor in things like Uber. Maybe you've heard of Uber, Facebook. Maybe you've heard of Facebook. He also won a Chinese kickboxing championship, which I think I'm going to talk about. That has an important lesson in there for you. And he is a workout and diet guru. He has done all kinds of things. He uses himself as a human guinea pig, is what he calls it, to test out ways of losing weight and working out to really maximize, actually. He's always looking for the hack, the shortcut, to really get you the most out of what it is you're trying to do. And I guess that's a good segue right into one of the main points of this book, and that is how to get more out of life. And especially with time, I've touched on it before, it's the one equalizing factor that we all have. I don't care who you are, we only have 24 hours in a day, so you have to make the most of them. What really blew my mind about 10 years ago when this book came out and when I read it, and by the way, I bought it because, first of all, it said the 4-hour work week. Who doesn't want to work 4 hours? And second of all, it had a picture of palm trees on the front and a hammock. So, hey, isn't that the dream? You know, we want to work less and make more and enjoy life more. And I thought, well, 4 hours a week, yeah, that seems like a kind of a scam, but I'll go ahead and buy this book and check it out. Turns out there's a story behind that. He tested that title against a bunch of other titles, and that was the one that got people's interest, really. And that's one of the first lessons in the book. One of the things that he really wants you to do is test things out. Now, his form of business is online. He started with an online supplement company, and he would do what's called A/B split testing. So he would have a web page that had one look and one, headline at the top, and then he would have a different idea and a different headline on the other one, and he would rotate back and forth between these two different approaches, and whichever one got the most interest, that's the one he would go with. And this is now a thing. You can go with companies if you're developing a product or a website, and the company does automatic A/B split testing for you so that you can refine and hone really your message and what your brand is and see what appeals to buyers the most. So what I like about that is that he's just not taking guesses. He doesn't get an idea and think, if I do it this way, people are really, really going to like it because I like it and my mom told me it's a great idea. He's actually going out and testing ideas before he implements them. And I guess this is a good time to take a step back and say, this guy's not a chiropractor. Obviously, he has nothing to do with chiropractic, but he is a businessman. And I think there are some really good principles that he teaches in the book. And beyond that, really good philosophies that he lives his life by that are worth looking at and examining and maybe applying some to your life. If I had to wrap up what I really like about Tim Ferriss is that a lot of what he says is transformational in the sense that it is the antithesis of what modern society tells you that you need to be or how you need to be. Some of the big assumptions that are out there just aren't true, and he proves that. That's the other nice thing. He doesn't just sit there and espouse philosophy that he thinks might be true. He gives all of the real-world examples that he has tried and said, this works because I did it this way. And I'll go back to that Chinese kickboxing example. What he did was he studied the rules. And he found a loophole, and that is someone instantly was disqualified the second they stepped any part of their body outside of this circle. So he was not a big guy, and he doesn't know a whole lot about kickboxing, but what he did is he started training and made his only focus to be able to push his opponent, any part of them, outside of this circle, and he would automatically win because the other person would be automatically disqualified. So he walked in and he did just that, and he became this Chinese kickboxing champion. Now, it upset the Chinese, and the federation or whatever it is, that the governing body that runs that out there has changed the rules so that can't happen anymore. But he was really smart about it. He could have spent years studying kickboxing and getting really good at that craft. But instead, he spent time studying the rules and found a way to win. Now, some in business have looked at that and said, well, that's cheating. He's just playing the game. He looked at that and that wasn't a real win. That was a cheating win. And I guess you could say that. But when you look at all kinds of things in life, there is a gray area, and rules are rules. They're made by the rule makers. And if you can find a way to go in and get more accomplished by really understanding those rules and applying the rules that you didn't create, but applying those rules and living by them and coming out with a win, I think that's huge. And there's obviously in, our industry, we don't want to cross a line. We don't want to cheat. It's different, but that fundamental lesson where you want to apply your concentrated effort and time to one or two specific things that really have a bigger impact overall so that you can get that win. I think that's a great philosophy. So he structures most of the framework for the book in something. It's an acronym, DEAL, D-E-A-L. So D, definition. You want to replace your self-defeating assumptions. I've covered that a lot in this podcast, but you want to tame your inner dialogue and replace it with something more positive. Elimination. Forget time management. And this is what I love. Turns out there's a lot in our lives that is unimportant. And I'll give you an example in my life. TV. I'd say 99% of what's on TV is unimportant. And when I talk to other folks, they talk to me about things like they're binging on Game of Thrones. Now, I've never watched it. I'm sure it's a great show, but it's ultimately unimportant in your life. And there are so many things like that. Social media, Facebook, unless you're really marketing your own business, you're reading a whole lot about what people had for dinner. Or what he does is he really partitions his life. He takes it down and says, for an hour once a week, I'm going to return email. For an hour once a week, I'll look at social media. The news, this is a big one because he's a smart guy and he says, you know what, I don't want to know about this stuff. And he takes a lot of flack for being uninformed. You're just not informed. And in our 24/7 news cycle with internet and cable and satellite, it's some people's second hobby is to be a news hound and just sit there and eat that stuff up. But he didn't pay any attention to it. Now, is he informed? Yeah. He is informed. And why? Because there are some thought leaders that he respects their opinion. And when he has a question, he'll ask them to the people, he asks it of the people who are paying attention to all of what's going on in the world. And when he needs to make a decision, he consults them on that decision. But honestly, it is so much noise, so much that you can't do anything about that ultimately it is a distraction. So when you're planning your life, when you're trying to get more time, really, what stuck with me is the first question you have to ask is this important? Is this relevant? Is it time sensitive? And then sort it on that basis. I have a little drawing that I made that hangs right above my desk that says, this is how my brain sorts problems. And in one area, it says, my problem. And it's real small. And then this bigger area says, not my problem. It's a whole lot of things that just aren't my problem. And that's most things in life. What I can really control and should be concerned about is actually very small. So change how much time you are spending on the things that are unimportant, get rid of them, and start focusing on what is important. Next, he talks about automation. So that's the A in DEAL. Learn to put cash flow on autopilot. And he has a whole system of how you do this and how he did it. When you read the book today, it's all an online business, and a lot of it doesn't work the way it used to work. So much has changed in the last 10 years with Google and the internet that the way he built his businesses can't really be done the way he did it. So, that part, there's not a whole lot that is actionable, but certainly in our practices, as much of what we can automate, we should. And this is part of having good systems, really dialed in systems. And lastly is liberation. You create freedom from location. So this is hard if you are a practice owner and the practitioner inside that practice. If you don't go to work, adjustments don't happen. So that's where becoming an owner who is also an entrepreneur and has people that work for him, maybe associates, that's where the owner can take a step back. So in my case, my wife and I own 2 practices, but one is in Colorado, which is 9.5 hours away from where we live. Well, we're not working in that practice, but that practice is generating income. And that is an example of liberation. If we had 10 practices, we could live wherever we want and really just fly around, checking out the practices, making sure the wheels aren't falling off the place. But that's one example of building a machine that is really just creating income. I want to touch on a few other things he talks about. He says less is not laziness, and that our culture tends to reward personal sacrifice over personal effectiveness. But the new rich, and he breaks it down into the new way of thinking versus the old, he calls the new way the new rich, they measure their contribution in results, not time. So think about it. Any employer you've had that says you have to be here at this time and then you have to work this many hours, that's how they're measuring success. Instead of, here is your workload, and whether you get it done in 5 hours or 40 hours, we don't care. We're really just measuring those results of your workload. Think about that, how that is in corporate America. I would say most of corporate America doesn't function by that model. They really just look at the hours. But is that hourly measurement, is that the best indicator of performance? I would say not. He also talks about how the timing is never right, and to forget pros and cons lists, just go. And I've talked about that too. I mean, the timing's never going to be right. Now, certainly sometimes timing can be a little better than other times, so it's not a blind, 100% of the time you just do it. No, you'll always carefully consider your options, but not for too long. We don't want to have paralysis by analysis. And if it's a dumb thing, you move on to the next one. It's failing forward or fast failing. You just want to get past that bad idea to the next good idea. But the idea is that you're doing something and you're doing it now. And this one we've all heard too. This one is asking for forgiveness, not permission. That ties in with just do it, okay? So you're going to do things. If you're working for an employer and you want to get a side hustle, you want to have something secondary going on in your life, bringing in income, you just start doing it. And you start changing things around your workflow at work to the extent that you can. Don't go ask for permission, but just start doing it. So a large part of the book, or at least a portion of it, is really how to transition someone who is working a 9 to 5 in maybe a corporate or cubicle environment and get them, a side hustle that is bringing in some cash, and then they can hopefully transition out of that job for an employer into working for themselves. But again, these are golden nuggets that he's really throwing out there, ways to get things done and to make that happen. From there, he goes on and talks about how to create a 6-month and a 12-month timeline that he calls a dream line, and he includes a worksheet to help you get through that and figure out where you want to go. It's real useful. It's a different way of looking at things, but I found it very useful. And then he goes into other things that you've probably heard before. I've talked about them. That's the 80-20 rule. You're going to look at what's going on in your practice, for example. What 20% of things in your practice are causing 80% of the problems, and you get rid of those. That could be problem patients. That could be problem employees, problem systems. What 20% of sources are resulting in 80% of your desired outcomes and happiness. And you flip it. So that's what you're going to focus on, right? And going into any job, but especially our practices, since that's what we do, go in and look at it with that mindset. I've talked about it before. It's not new, but it is certainly important. Avoid time wasters. This is another one. You might have friends, you might love them dearly, but they might be big time vampires. And you have to eliminate those sources of things that take your time from you. That can be email. That can be all kinds of things. A chatty coworker. I mean, it's fun to engage in conversation and things like that. But really, when we all have the same amount of time and we want to get somewhere in life, you have to start cutting down on those time wasters. And the rest of the book goes on to take you through how you can set up your own business. Like I said, a lot of it doesn't really translate to today's internet environment because so much has changed in the 10 years since the book came out. But there are great lessons throughout, and Tim does a great podcast. I highly recommend you check that out. It is really with national superstars, Seth Godin, authors, there's movie directors, there are movie stars, there's Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. I mean, a lot of different folks. It's always interesting who he gets on there, but he really does try to tease out what makes them tick, what makes that particular person so successful. He's just an interesting guy, and I enjoy his perspective, and he's written a couple of things. He's got the 4-Hour Chef, the 4-Hour 24-hour workout. So he's taken this theme of really getting the most out of what it is you're trying to do in the least amount of time to a couple of different places. And he does all of these, like I said, he does everything himself. If it's a diet book he wrote, he's done the diet, and he talks about everything that he did and the weight loss results he had. If it's a workout book, it's the same. It's really what I love about the guy. He's very genuine and honest and open when it comes to his successes and his failures, and that's rare a lot of times. So check it out. It's a big mindset shift. It might be the catalyst to have you look at your life differently and your practice differently and your priorities differently. This is really what 10 years ago, I think I was in chiropractic school at the time, I read the book and thought, oh, this guy has got something here. And I really didn't know how to apply it at that time because you have bigger fish to fry. You want to start your practice and you need to find patients, but all the work that goes into that. But in the back of my mind, I always was thinking, I don't want to spend too much time on things that are unnecessary. I always need to be striving towards efficiency. And throughout the 10 years since I read that book, I've been really always trying to tighten up my life, make everything more efficient. And so far, I think I've really benefited from that. So I hope this has been useful to you. Go out and check out the book. I'm going to link to it in the show notes as well as summarize some of these points. But check out that and the podcast. I'll link to that as well. And once again, thanks so much. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Chiro Business Mojo podcast at www.chirobusinessmojo.com.